Hi, welcome to Fundraising from the Ground Up. My name is Kim Peterson, and on this channel we talk about fundraising, especially for small nonprofits. Now, today is kind of a mixture between a rant and commentary and an explainer. We're talking about unrestricted funding, kind of as it relates to grants, and we're throwing in a little bit of capacity building as well. So let's dive in. As someone who's written many grants throughout my career, it's really easy to see some of the shortcomings of the grant funding system. And anybody who's spent any time writing grants, researching, or even working at a nonprofit organization that relies on a lot of grant funding, you probably see some of these shortcomings as well. And one of the big ones is that currently most of the funding out there for grants is for time-limited programs and projects. For some reason, funders just really like to see their money go towards things like programming costs, and often it's not ongoing funding. So of course, programs and program delivery is super important for most nonprofits out there. It's how you achieve the outcomes related to your mission. Programs that effectively address needs in the community do require money for staffing, management, equipment, and things like supplies. However, ongoing programs do not exist in isolation. They always require operational support, including HR, financial management, of course, fundraising, and marketing. And these aren't often just not built into a program's budget, or they're not considered costs directly related to programming. So the issue with programs-only funding is that it doesn't support the systems that maintain the program. And these programs that benefit so many people simply can't exist without operational support. This can be a really challenging issue for many small nonprofits, especially those that rely heavily on grants. And I've seen a variety of solutions to this dilemma. So some organizations will build their programs' budgets to incorporate most operational costs. For example, they'll divide the costs of salaries between the programs, like the executive director salary, even the administrative assistant salary, with the argument that all of these roles contribute to the delivery of a program. Some organizations add an overhead budget line to every grant, like 10%, 15%, with that money going towards those operational costs. And then some organizations are able to raise enough unrestricted funding to cover their non-program costs. So each of these solutions come with their own challenges, and it could be that the right choice is different for every nonprofit. Also, some of them are not possible for every nonprofit. However, with each of these, the onus is on the nonprofit to figure it out. A funding relationship should be equal and reciprocal. The funder has goals for social impact, and the nonprofit has the people, systems, and community relationships to work towards those goals. The rhyme and reason for these restrictions is really all over the map. Some granting restrictions are the result of bureaucratic priorities within a government and can differ drastically from one department to the other. Restrictions from private foundations are determined by the directors, which may be the result of personal biases or misinformation. So there's no common logic behind these restrictions, and they can sometimes feel really arbitrary. And you can also see too how a tremendous amount of time is invested in navigating funding restrictions at all levels of the granting cycle, from research to writing and finally reporting, not to mention the time spent by leadership and board addressing a never-ending funding gap for operations. This is time and money that can be spent on the actual mission of an organization and helping people, or devoting time to activities that will help a nonprofit grow and improve so that it can continue to serve the community in the best way possible. So a real solution to this problem actually lies within the funders themselves in the form of prioritizing unrestricted funding and capacity building funding. Within the charitable sector, we're slowly starting to see these types of funding programs more often. There's a growing call for less restrictive funding from the charitable sector, especially following the pandemic, with so many charities in high need of core support to stay afloat, as well as funding to help them transform their operations to keep up with a rapidly changing landscape. So unrestricted funding is a fairly simple concept. It's in the name. Funds are unrestricted, so a nonprofit can put them towards any type of cost: program delivery, rent, insurance, or the executive director's salary. This is all essential to the delivery of a program too, by the way. But the onus is now on the funder to determine which nonprofits are doing the work that aligns with their goals for community impact. Now, capacity building grants are a little bit different, but I think they're addressing some of the same challenges. Capacity building is restricted technically, but the outcomes they're seeking really align with organizational growth, and they're supporting priorities that are usually not allowed with program grants. Things like technology, training, policy development, things like that. So I have two examples of some recent funding programs here in Canada, where I am based, where the focus is either unrestricted funding or capacity building. So this is an example of an unrestricted granting program through the Vancouver Foundation in Vancouver, BC, Canada, and it's called the Recovery and Resiliency Fund. They opened up this grant funding portal in the summer of 2022, and they're just about to announce the recipients now. It's at recording, it's the middle of January here, so they're going to be announcing those soon. But this is a fund that's offering 3-year grants, and the restrictions there are some restrictions, but they're fairly limited. So I would include this as an unrestricted grant. And I'll just pop over to the guidelines here to give you a sense of what that looks like. So they state here that the funds will be used for overall operational recovery and resiliency, including operating costs, capacity building, staffing costs, service delivery costs, technology investments. So that's just an example of a fund that offers unrestricted funding. So here's an example of a capacity building grant, and this is the Community Services Recovery Fund through the Canadian Red Cross, Community Foundations of Canada, and United Way. This is actually government funding that these 3 agencies are managing, and it's a $400 million fund, I believe. And the focus is to fund projects that are designed to strengthen the internal capacity of an organization. So they've got 3 separate categories here: investing in people, investing in systems and processes, and investing in program, service, innovation, and redesign, with information gained during the COVID-19 pandemic. So to wrap up this little commentary rant, I wanted to shine a light on funding for capacity building specifically. So some examples of capacity building for nonprofits, according to the National Council of Nonprofits, include communication strategy, improving volunteer recruitment, ensuring thoughtful leadership succession, updating a nonprofit's technology or improving how it measures its outcomes. All these things build capacity of a charitable nonprofit to effectively fulfill its mission. When capacity building is successful, it strengthens a nonprofit's ability to deliver on its mission over time, thereby enhancing the nonprofit's ability to have a positive impact on lives and communities. So my bias as a fundraising consultant, working with a lot of nonprofits that are really relying a lot on programs-only grants and finding themselves stuck in a never-ending cycle, they should take really every opportunity to break out of that cycle and find ways to build fundraising capacity that will bring in unrestricted funding. So usually through individual and corporate donations. So this could include creating a fundraising plan, building that communication strategy, investing in technology you need for both of these strategies, fundraising and communications, and also finding appropriate professional development opportunities that focus on fundraising for both your staff and your board. And a lot of this boils down to investing in fundraising operations. So if that's the sort of capacity building that seems like is the right path for your organization and you're not sure where to start, I do have a fundraising operations checklist on my resource page, which is just a list of all the really foundational back-end systems needed for effective fundraising. And you can access that by becoming a subscriber to Fundraising from the Ground Up newsletter, and the link to do that is in the description below. If you're looking for a more general assessment tool, the one thing I found doing my research for this video is the organizational assessment tool from the Ford Foundation in the United States. Now, I haven't used it, but it does seem like a very comprehensive tool if that's the stage you're at, and the link for that is in the description below as well. And now before I sign off, I also wanted to highlight an article that came out through Nonprofit Quarterly in September 2022 called "Should We Cancel Capacity Building?" Now, the author Marcus Littles examines the term capacity building and points out that a lot of the practices and around capacity building can be harmful for BIPOC-led organizations. Marcus writes, Over the last 17 years in the field working with community groups, it has become increasingly clear to me that effective and sustainable institutions are not built by identifying organizational deficits that racism and patriarchy have contributed to creating. Rather, powerful, resilient, and liberatory organizations are built by complementing the genius, expertise, and Indigenous wisdom that many BIPOC-led and centered organizations possess. I thought this was a really thought-provoking article, and it's led me to think really closely about my approach to consulting and how I want to be more aware of the power dynamics in best practices and also the racist system that we all participate in. So I wanted to share it here again and encourage you to have a read. The link is below. So thanks again for joining me on this video where I talked about capacity building and unrestricted funding. I'll see you next week.